I own half of the company,
Yeah,
so.
so the other ones are on there.
He's in Singapore currently.
Yeah, okay, so they are from Heidelberg, and we want to kind of establish Troopers as a Heidelberg event. It was also natural to ask it to provide some platform for another highly specialized Heidelberg company.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation and thanks for coming. And thanks for the introduction. I would say that although this is a very special topic, it's important for everyone because SAP applications are widely used. I think, so who knows SAP by daily experience? One, two, not that much. We are very close to SAP headquarters here. And I would say that although the headquarters is somewhere on the countryside, the impact of SAP is tremendous. So all Fortune 500 companies, or almost all, use SAP, and yeah, the impact of vulnerabilities in SAP code is higher than a vulnerability in a simple web shop, of course, because if you have, for example, a supply chain management solution and there's something goes wrong, the trucks will stay up to Frankfurt on the highway. That's a really physical impact that you have here. A few words about our company. So we do SAP stuff since 2001 as freelancers, and we became a little bit more serious in 2006 when we teamed up from 2 to 3 people up to 12 people as we have the team today. Our headquarters are here in Heidelberg. It's the other Heidelberg print building here behind the train station. We do SAP for over 9 years now, and we do nothing else today. So we narrowed our application security expertise to exactly one domain, which is SAP programming. SAP programming today is either Java programming, which is when you want to click on something to have a UI, but the real powerful stuff is written in SAP's own proprietary language called ABAP in German, ABAP in English. I don't know how to pronounce it in English correctly. So we have also written a tool which is a static analyzer that can detect security defects in ABAP code. Just as most of computer science do it, to simplify our own life and getting rid of manual code reviews and doing that by pushing a button. Yeah, we do SAP audits, code reviews, and we have, last year we have published a book which is currently and unfortunately only available in German, Secure ABAP Programming, which is the first book on the topic. And today I like to talk a little bit about what can go wrong in applications as you know it. I think all of you know the OWASP top 10 ranking of vulnerabilities. So I consider that as a very typical benchmark, and I want to relate that to SAP programming and to show you some examples why things can go wrong and what are the reasons and what you can do about it. The last one, what you can do about it, is not simple. But I want to give you an idea how this looks like in SAP, and yeah, what's the challenge here. About that language, I would say that more than 90% of all code in SAP environments is written in ABAP. So whenever you hear that people write things in Java, they are the minority of SAP programmers. ABAP is the real powerful language for people who have a business background and expressing what they want to do in terms of a business process in a programming language. It's not the programming language that you usually use to write a fancy UI or something like that. So it exists for more than 30 years, which is good since we can assume that it's a proven and established language, but it started with a COBOL-like syntax, but the disadvantage is that you have a very grown language that supports, I know, at least 8 different programming paradigms at the same time. So it's not really easy to see whether a guy is writing ABAP in object-oriented way or is writing something else. And the ABAP interpreter can understand anything that you do. But from a security perspective, that's a nightmare to have several different programming paradigms. Very interesting thing also is that there's no reserved list of keywords, so you can name a variable and call it method or program or whatever you want, which doesn't make it easy to understand what really happens. So it's a very context-sensitive language too. Very special thing about ABAP is that it depends on a database and has a built-in SQL dialect. Depending on a database means that both the programming language as well as the data is stored in a database. Yeah, and the development environment is developed in ABAP 2. But, in contrast to other programming environments where you have your local repository of code, you usually access your ABAP code via a remote link or via a client, and it resides on the server, which allows a few nice things which I haven't seen in another programming environment so far. You have a built-in so-called transport management that allows you to do a very professional and efficient software logistic, having a test system where you develop whatever you want. Then the process is called a transport, moving the code from the development system in a standardized way to a quality assurance system where you do all the testing, and then you do a final transport to the productive system, in theory. Sometimes you see different implementations of that concept. What else is different in ABAP? The code, when you are an SAP customer, you get the complete code in clear text. So there's no shipment of binary code. You get the complete source code of the standard in each SAP installation. So what SAP is shipping is the so-called SAP standard, and whoever told you that you can use the standard and go is a liar. You have to heavily invest in making your SAP system running like you want it to run, which can be done by configuration, adjusting the business processes, or you can do this, or as a complementary approach, you can write your custom code. That means on top of the SAP toolbox, there's a lot of development going on, and yeah, that's why we have a job. So what can you do as a customer? You can copy the standard code, you can rename it, you can modify it. So you have a certain program in the standard, you want to change it, just copy it and do something with it. That's called, SAP speak for that is a modification. You modify the standard. But you also can write your own code in order to adapt the standard to your needs. That's called customizing, or is part of customizing. You can develop code for non-standard business processes. I think SAP has about 200 different industry solutions for oil and gas, insurances, agriculture, pharma companies, production processes, and so on. But if you are not happy with those 200 standard solutions, you can write your own. Or you can buy from third-party vendors. So you see, you have a very powerful environment for controlling your business with a very established piece of software. Things started to get worse when SAP opened its back-end monolithic R3 to the internet, which happened by 2001, something around that. And SAP started to implement interface technologies and open the processes to other systems, but also to introduce front-end technologies that we all expect today. The classical one is called, so when you read strange names here, like Dunpro, this is very typical in SAP. You have established concepts, like this one. This is a UI technology, which is very similar to X11, but SAP gives it a different name. So you see established concepts, but you have a different name and you have a proprietary implementation of it. Dunpro means that you have a user interface for the backend code where you can enter input. And this requires also a proprietary user interface called the sub-GUI. Another interesting technology is the so-called Internet Transaction Server that allows to access SAP backend programs over the internet. The first step here, it was the first web technology of SAP, and today we see that development almost stopped, but we see it widely used as of today. So for example, the Conrad electronic shop was or is still based on the ITS server. Business server pages is the concept of having something like JSP but for ABAP. So you have your HTML page and include there your native ABAP code. You have several programming paradigms here, including model view controller, but also very quick and dirty programming too. This is very widely used, BSP framework, and because you can very easily offer back-end processing to your user. The newest technology is called Web Dunpro, which allows you to write user interfaces regardless of the device that you actually use. So I can point and click a user interface, and then I can say I want to use it on my PDA, I want to use it on a browser, I want to use it wherever I want, whatever SAP has implemented as a device. And the interesting thing here is that you really can point and click your UI, and then the only thing you have to do is the backend, the integration to the backend logic. This actually started as a Java implementation, but then when the ABAP team learned about the technology, they took over and they overtook the Java engineers in the end. So today, Web Dunpro ABAP is the more mature technology, and as I know it today, the most secure technology that SAP has, since the framework is completely rendered by the SAP standard. So there's no way theoretically to embed your own HTML or JavaScript And for that reason, you usually can't cause a vulnerability like cross-site scripting, since the framework is doing all the encoding, for example. Caveat here, you also cannot avoid vulnerabilities because the framework is doing everything. So if the framework has a problem, you have it too, and there's nothing you can do about it, except opening a support message for SAP. Okay, another interesting thing is the so-called web GUI, which looks like a sub GUI, but is displayed in a browser. That's an earlier version was implemented on top of the ITS. Today we have a plugin in the web application server, and there are many, many other ways how you can interface with an SAP core system. For example, you use the so-called JCO, which is the Java connector, so you can write a Java GUI for an ABAP backend system. You can access backend systems. That's not request for commons. That's SAP's name for a remote procedure call. They call it remote function call. You have Adobe Flash as user interface technology. Nowadays also Microsoft Silverlight, PHP, Python, whatever you know. Yeah, and whatever you need, be sure that SAP has it somehow. You can email, you can do FTP, you can do web services. There are all kinds of technologies, just a little bit different than you are used to it. So that's the introduction to SAP and how you can write user interfaces. The core of it is the so-called application server, which is part of the SAP basis, or since the days of Shai Agassi, it's called NetWeaver. NetWeaver is actually a collection of technologies that contains the database abstraction layer, the operating system abstraction layer of SAP, authorization management, and many things. So the application server supports single sign-on, cookie-based usually. That's for security people very interesting. By default, it's issued for slash or the domain. So if you have any subdomain, you're not really secure. You need to configure that and change it. And by default, it's neither HTTP only nor set to secure. You need to change that default to make it secure. You can write your own HTTP handlers. So we see people who do that. But the UI technologies that I mentioned before are all HTTP handlers. So we always recommend not to implement your own HTTP handler, since you can do many things in a wrong way, which is a generally good rule of thumb in SAP environments. Never do things on your own which are already implemented in the standard. The configuration can be done by so-called profile parameters, where you change the configuration. This is done by a report, which has a strange name. Reports usually have strange names and numbers in it in SAP. You need to know the right reports, or a so-called transaction, which is called SICF. ICF stands for Internet Communication Framework, and S means simply this is written by SAP. Nice thing here is that the web application server is also shipped with a blacklist filter that contains certain patterns like script or other bad things that we know. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing, and you can extend the patterns if you want. Okay, Today I want to show you some examples how things go wrong by focusing on the business server pages, since they are really widely used. And I would say that the exposure of BSP applications is very high. Why is that? Google is our friend here. Just look for the URL pattern that you usually see in BSP applications. So if you look for this substring SAP/BC/BSP, you get more than 80,000 hits. And here's just an example what happens and who uses BSP. There are interesting companies like SAP, Bayersdorf, Heidelberg, where we are here, auditors like KPMG, Vodafone, you name it. So this is all you need to do from an attacker point of view to understand where you can start to play with an SAP application. And I want to show you two examples how OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities relate to SAP. Let's start from the bottom. Why are those issues not applicable? Because you can configure the backend system that it does not display any error message to the user. So that even if your programmer has done a bad job, like writing username and password in an error message, we have seen that, you can stop such behavior by suppressing the error message and instead logging it to a log file. That's why we don't consider this as a serious problem in SAP. Session management is built in the SAP standard. If you don't implement your own session management, which you should not do, you have no issue here. Cryptographic storage is the same. SAP has a standard API for that. Communications is also done by means of configuring a system appropriately, and the URL access can be restricted by configuring the system too. So this has nothing to do with programming defects, which is really good. So there are many things that can't go wrong in SAP programs. But of course, you have those cross-site scripting attacks, injection flaws, file execution, and whatever you know. And the disadvantage of the OWASP top 10 is that it's only 10. There are many more things that can go wrong in SAP. We have a longer list, compiled a longer list and compared that to the SANS 25, for example. But today we want to focus on cross-site scripting and SQL injection to give you an idea how that can look like. So the best practice for preventing cross-site scripting, I don't need to explain cross-site scripting, right? Everybody knows it. Good. Standard is encoding and escaping. So the SAP guys implemented solutions for that too. So there's a couple of encoding functions in a class called HTTP utility, which is standard by standard shipped, but you need to use it explicitly. In BSP pages, you can simplify that by using a special page attribute. And there's also a so-called tag lib that allows you to use predefined tags in your HTML page, which also supports some cross-site scripting prevention. How does it look like in the code? So, as I mentioned earlier, BSPs are like JSPs, HTML pages with some included ABAP code. So on the top you see that there's a form and that the value of that form is later printed in the HTML page. So this is a classical cross-site scripting attack vector. You read something from the user, and at a later point in time, it's written back to the HTML context. So this is how the code looks like if you have guest as the name in the form field. And this is the output. And of course, I can craft a special URL that contains malicious code. And if you don't do anything against it, you have a cross-site scripting in SAP too. So this is the first takeaway message. If you don't care about secure programming, you are screwed, since all the known and popular web attacks also work in the standard SAP implementation. Why is that really bad? Because it's so simple to get your hands on the logon ticket, a single sign-on ticket, with a cross-site scripting. And if you have the logon ticket to the SSO, you can access all the backend systems in the name of the user, and he won't even know. Nice thing about SAP 2 is if you have the session, you know all the standard transactions and reports. That's no secret because they have standardized names. So in contrast to custom developed application, many things go wrong if you can steal a standard user session. Yeah, and the solution in plain HTML BSPs is just to use the escaping function, the appropriate one, and where you do escaping. And if you use that, yeah, nothing happens except having a strange output on the page. But that's what we want in terms of security. So you can encode depending on the context. Is it HTML? Is it in JavaScript? Is it a URL escaping? And you can also do that with another syntax here. So it's a simplified syntax. The advantage is that you in a very comfortable way prevent XSS attacks. But every single output must be encoded manually. And you need to understand what you do. So use the right function to do the encoding. So the effort is very high. It's error prone. And if developers don't know what to do, usually they make it worse than better. Okay, another presumably more comfortable way is to use the page attribute called force encode. If you use that, all parameters are per default escaped. So there's nothing that you need to do in the code. But the problem is that you can only define one value per page. So if you select HTML, you get a complete HTML encoding, but no URL or JavaScript encoding. That's the bad thing here. Yeah, and this is an example how it works in HTML-B. HTML-B is, as I said, a special tag library from SAP where you can also use standard tags, and the simple thing is here that you can also enable encoding by using the appropriate parameter here. So caveat by the tag lib is that it's per default deactivated. So mostly if you want to secure something in SAP, you need to secure it. I have only 5 minutes left, which is not enough, but I try to do it fast. SQL attacks in SAP are also possible. SAP has its own SQL dialect, which is called OpenSQL, which is internally converted to prepared statements, which is a good thing for security. So statements and user data are separated. And if you have an application like that one that has certain parameters to, in this case, to select data from a table that stores credit card transactions. So here you see the user, his credit card number, and where he has shopped in the past. Very typical application. And you see in the code, this is a special transaction where you can watch or trace your SQL statements. Here you see that the SQL statement, the code, is separated from the variables. So nothing can go wrong here. And if I would try to add a typical always true statement to the content, it would not appear here in the where clause, but as a piece of the data, and that's nothing would happen here. The bad thing is that SAP has also so-called dynamic OpenSQL. The difference here is that you have parentheses here around, which means that the input is dynamically computed and that you can influence the SQL statement that way. You can find that out if you provoke bad input, which we did here by having a hyphen, by adding a hyphen, and then I get an exception that says I have dynamic OpenSQL here and there's a problem close to the parentheses. So as an attacker, I now know I can attack it. This is the same application where you now see all users and all credit card data. How have I implemented that? I have just added an OR statement which is always true. Month like percent means month is the client. In an SAP database you have different clients, and if you add something like give me all data where the client is something, you get all data because that's always true. And here you see that in dynamic SQL the input is added to the where clause. Yeah, that can easily lead to SQL injection. You have no encoding functions here. You can inject the prepared statements. So there's a very simple answer here to not have SQL injection attacks. Don't use dynamic SQL. That's a very, very sad news for developers who want to write very smart code, which is dynamic and generic, and you can do that, but if you write generic and nice and smart code, it's usually insecure. So what we covered in this short talk are cross-site scriptings and injection flaws, which by the way don't only depend on a browser. You can also have, for example, a SQL injection in a SAP GUI. We had to record that because some clients didn't believe it, that you can have things like directory traversal and SQL injection in SAP GUI environments too. This is possible. If you want to see it, just come to the table and I give you a short demo of that too. Yeah, takeaways is that you have very nice web front-end technologies in SAP. We had not much time to talk about all of them. We did not have much time to talk about all attacks which are possible if you have bad code. But I hope this gives you an impression that SAP programming is also a very important security topic. And even if you have done everything right in your infrastructure, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and have everything bulletproof, the application still can have defects. And since much custom code is written in SAP projects, you usually don't know that you have a defect, which is very scary. But it saves my job in the end. So you need to understand how known vulnerabilities relate to SAP, and next step to success is understand what to do and what not to do. That's all for today.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. It would not be honest if I say thanks for the excellent talk, as I did not have the opportunity to follow it.
It was excellent.
I'm sure it was. Any questions from your side? If not, I suggest heading over to dinner, whoever takes part in that. I just planned everybody gets there on his own for say simple logistics reasons, and to give an opportunity of flexibility.